So in terms of composition, these are some images that we've been inspired by. Generally, best practices in composing our camera angles, and many of them were applied in this project. Maybe Freddie wants to speak to these a bit.
Yeah. So basically, what we have in here is a great reference imagery from Julius Schulman. I don't know if you are familiarized with this amazing photographer. So we bring this image in here just somehow to explain principles of composition. So I'm just going to go through these principles really quickly. So in the first shot, we got a layering composition, which means like we're going to have depth in the first layer, which is going to be a foreground layer, a middle ground layer. So in this composition, the main key is to have different layering to get depth into the image. Another principle of composition, or that was used by this photographer, was that vertical lines will always stay as vertical 90 degree, and the horizontal lines will never be flat, which means like all the horizontal lines will have perspective. He also worked very well the framing of the images. So we're gonna see clearly, like in this element, in here in this photo, how framing start helping us to create depth into the image, but also to our certain type of detail. Also, there's some furniture in here in this image that is also helping to develop the whole animation of the photography. So we're going to be explaining later on what the rule of thirds is in composition, but for now we just want to share like how this photographer was doing the composition and how somehow we recreate those composition rules that he used in our composition.
So again, our project, we didn't necessarily have to deal with vertical lines, as we had a form that was very organic. But many of these principles we do bear in mind when we're setting up our cameras for these types of early explorations. So this is one of the clay render image boards that we sent to our client for the exterior images of the bowl. You can see that we used an HDRI on the upper and lower right-hand sides of the image, and then we experimented with V-ray sun and sky, but always bearing in mind sort of a thirds composition. We tried different types, framing centrally, vertical portrait format, more of a horizontal format. This is really the moment when we go through all of our possible ideas for these shots. What's that?
Peter.
Peter.
You're right.
Yeah, yeah. And then this is one of the early images of the interior of the bowl. And we'll go into this in, again, some detail. But for this shot, it was important for us to add some very basic materials so we knew where the focus was. And then we were playing a lot with lighting. And Jason's going to go through this in Max, how this was set up. But this was essentially our work in progress, one submission for this rendering. For the exterior view, again, as I mentioned, the override material, it allowed us to really emphasize the reflection. That's something that was important in the mood board that Freddie discussed. And then the framing, you know, often it's a conversation, the framing. It's not always exactly what we would have imagined, but we end up achieving a pretty great compromise in most of these situations. And then the exterior, the aerial shot.
So basically, I want to talk about composition, setting your viewport up for the rule of thirds. The rule of thirds is basically keeping your image. It kind of lends itself to what Freddie was just referencing with those photographs. Basically, breaking your image up into thirds for focal points. So you can use these points in your viewport as your focal points. And if you Oftentimes, like for the exterior, if we want to center, if we have our building in the center of the image, we want to use our horizon line on a third. So there's not always going to be a focal point on these 4 points, for instance. So you can see this better. I'll open a JPEG. Basically, this is how we've broken up our viewport. These are those points, the focal points we're talking about, and also points of interest in your image can be in any one of these thirds. It's just good practice and naturally attracts the eye to certain objects or things you want to call out in your scene. So if you come back to Max, I can show you how to set that up in your viewport. So if you go to Configure Viewports and you go to Save Frames, by default lock is on and these are off. So you don't see any of these lines in your viewport. So you can see right now it's kind of just a guessing game and what looks good. So to make that clearer, click your little plus sign up here, configure viewports. Turn the action safe and title safe on. If you unlock these, you can control these horizontal and vertical values. So that's how you break up your viewport. And 66 in the horizontal and 66 in the vertical here breaks it up for you evenly. But this is balanced out. When you're doing this, your aperture of your camera is wide open, so you're going to get a lot of light into the lens of your camera. So you got to balance it out. Now these numbers come into play where I put them at 100. It's now going to affect our scene in a different way. I'll render it and show you. So our scene should be very bright right now because our lens is wide open. We're shooting wide open, and we're not controlling it currently with the ISO, the light sensitivity, or the shutter speed. And as you can see, it's already rendering very slow because of we turned depth of field on. I'm just going to turn it off for render speed purposes. So if you do get into this and want to render these effects into your scene, the way you balance it out is your shutter speed. If you go higher on this, for instance, I don't know, 1200, your shutter speed is going to close very fast, but your aperture is much wider, so you're kind of counteracting what the camera is doing. So you're letting more light in here, but you're closing the shutter much quicker, and your ISO is less sensitive to light at this point. So at 100 is a very low ISO. So if we render, we should get closer to what we want. It's obviously still overexposed because we're shooting wide open again at 1.4. So if you up this, so now we should be getting more what we want. But if I was rendering with depth of field turned on, we should be getting all the foreground elements would be blurring depending on where we have our focal point set in our image. So there's a lot of stuff that would have needed to be painted in Photoshop if we didn't have Forest Pack here, specifically people and just planting in general. If the client has very specific plant layouts, it's good to use splines with Forest Pack to give boundaries and create custom planting areas. And with these, I've just used some dummy geometry so it's easier to read in the viewport. But with these people, there's a lot of people in like particular areas that we wanted. So this is all public space. This is that area with the parking lot with trucks and the tailgating happening, a lot of activity. So once we get this set up, or once we get an idea of where we want people, where we want things happening in our scene, we'll go in and we'll take the geometry. For instance, we want these sidewalks. So I wanted the sidewalk geometry to be my base geometry for my scatter. So I came in and I detached random surfaces where I want the people to be scattered. So these steps, obviously I don't want people everywhere, so it's good to break it up this way. Detach it as a separate surface. Normally name it as the surface that you want so it's easy to find in your scene. Use this forest pack on that surface that we created. So you can see the people are only being scattered on these objects that I just detached. So once you get your forest pack set up on that object, you add your geometry within the geometry tab. You can exclude areas, for instance, if you have people running through the skin of this building. So I have people cutting through the inside of this building that we don't want that to happen. So if I make a spline in these areas, I'll just do a large area to show you. This is going to be our exclusion spline. So basically it's going to remove people from a specific area where we don't want them. Create this. Click on the spline, tell it to exclude. It's going to automatically remove people or whatever we have. If we had plants there, it would do the same thing. It removes them from within this spline. When you're using a surface, you can't include in a spline and have a surface as your same scatter surface. So it either has to be a poly or a spline setup. So this exclusion only works. Or it only works as an exclusion, not an inclusion. So you can see here, this doesn't do anything if I move this spline around. It's not going to add objects to it. But it will exclude objects. And again, you can come in here, turn on your random rotation. What this does is just makes it a little more natural within your scene. Makes the people randomize, gives you more variation. Scale, not everybody's the same height, so give them a random scale. And then from your camera, you get more variation in your people. There we go. So same setup with the plants. So I've created some boxes, gave it a surface just like we did with the people. You can give it a probability. So if I don't want to see as many of this blue proxy, you can turn it all the way off if you want, or you can turn it up to 100%, less of this purple object. And the key to natural looking plants is using this clusters option. So you can set your distribution map. There's all these default ones, or you can load a custom map. If you have a specific planting plan, you can either paint a black and white map of your own, or just use these default ones. So this one puts it in a grid. Full is basically just a really dense area. And you can use this unit slider. A lot of times when you first get into forest pack, you don't know what setting adjusts the density of your plants or your people. This unit slider right here is exactly where you do that. So the lower the value, the more dense your object's going to get, the higher the value, the more spaced out they're going to get. So let's put this at 50. So normally it's, by default, it's on random. So if you have multiple proxies in your geometry list like we set up here, it's just going to mix them all together. That's where this map comes into play. If you do a custom map,
the multi-mat is a way to, as I explained, to get a specific geometry mask. But in case we don't have time for selecting each part of the geometry and applying and changing properties in the object ID, there's also another option which is more general, which is the V-Ray watercolor. What it does basically is like each object of your scene has like a color. So in here this is black, but I can change that color. So it depends how the geometry in your scene shows the color, like just like you're seeing right now here. We got the purple, yellow, subtle blue. That's how the watercolor will represent the path. So we can start like picking up, creating selections from that watercolor in a Photoshop file. I'll explain that later. But this watercolor is more in general, like usually if we don't have a clean file, like if we don't change the color, let's say if I don't have, just gonna select one geometry, if I don't have like a specific color in here, it'll just understand the colors the geometry came with. So it can have like, we can have like at least 10 to 20 different colors in the watercolor. So that's why it's more difficult to use these paths at the time of creating selecting masks in Photoshop. All right. One of the differences between multi-matte paths and the V-Ray watercolor, it is that the edges of the selecting mask are not as clean as they should be. The anti-aliasing seems to work better with the multi-matte element than the V-Ray watercolor. So we usually go for more multi-matte elements instead of V-Ray watercolor. But we usually send both options in case we forgot to select one object in the scene we want to get a mask from. All right, let's render a tiny sample. All right. Right, so we're just rendering here. Okay, now that we got our render done, our final render, we're just gonna, if we're using the V-Ray frame buffer, we're gonna have the option of seeing each one of the passes we select, each one of the render elements we select. So we got the alpha, which is gonna be really useful for manipulating the background in the scene, or the sky in this case. The multi-matte, which is gonna like show the selecting geometry in RGB, in red, green, and blue colors. At the moment, I mean, like if we get close to our image, we're gonna see like the edges are not pretty clear, but that's because we're not using the image sampler properly. We're not using the anti-aliasing option So if we start using the anti-aliasing option, we select the filter we want, definitely this is going to change. It's just going to render a small region. All right. The next one is the understanding how we create the effect of adding lights to these cars, so the scene will be more convincing in terms of sunset shot when there's more long shadows. So these lights in here in the cars will start enhancing that feeling. We're going to start applying the first atmospheric layer, secondary atmospheric layer, the third atmospheric layer, color bleeding, highlights in over our object, enhancing the sun, first color grading, curves adjustment layer, a color correction of independent colors, vignetting to define shadows and darkness over the edges of the image, so we can focus more in the building. And this is a subtle variation of lighting on the sky. There's also, this one is a blur effect. You don't really see that much effect in here, but if I start zooming in here, you're going to notice that the blur effect was just added in some parts of the image, just to accentuate, like sometimes the wind can blow in different parts. And a sharpness layer. This sharpness layer will make the printing sharper, a crispy image. You're going to see more definition in the whole shape of the object and in the material with the sharpness layer. And this is just like the whole palette that we start using from the beginning is reflected at the end, which is the yellow, red, and the gradient of this red, and some desaturated colors. And we're going to show the same process for the aerial view. These are the creation steps now for the interior shot. That was the base render. And mainly all people in the foreground were pasted in Photoshop. That was a step we're going to talk as soon as we arrived at that step. So in here, there's a change in the field. Then we got like levels, just enhancing the darkness point, the shadow area in our foreground, and bringing more light where the opening hole is. First approach to the sky. Start creating some color corrections and adding more light on the left-hand side. Just trying to define more where the light source was coming from. And if you see in here, there's no building. So we start like adding a basic texturing of the background. This is when we apply the ambient occlusion pass, just to define the contact shadows of our elements in here and in here. Then we play with the reflections, adding more reflectivity to the elements that were closer to the sky. We're picking up some colors and reflectivity from this source. Enhancing the color of the seats. And in here, we start like adding some basic color bleeding. If you see how the entrances are, we know we got a red color, but in here, there's
few color bleeding in some of the entrances. And in this case, the color bleeding is helping to create the atmospheric that something is happening, that a light source is behind that entrance. We also highlight the pitch and start adding some people to recreate the first approach of how people will be in the scene. And this is the layer that makes a big difference. It's like the whole animation of the whole entourage in the stadium. So I'm just going to try to zoom in. Okay. So in here, basically, what we did was to find reference photography of stadiums, and we start creating different layers to populate all seats around the main pitch. And this is another composition effect we start working on, the framing. Just gonna open my brush preset, select a diffuse edges brush. Play with opacity. Maybe I need to desaturate these blues because they're not matching with the sky. So I'm just going to do it manually. So now we got an additional clouds that will enhance the perspective and depth of the background of the sky, and they are matching with the base sky I've got. That's how we made the sky. In here, you're gonna see that the secondary texture I use for adding detail enhancement to the sky. It also has some information that I don't really need, which is the trees in here. I probably could use those trees, but they're overscale. So I don't want to see trees in here. What I'm gonna do is just create a new clipping layer. I'm going to turn off this exposure. I'm going to turn off my base render and just going to start painting over, fading away these trees. Kind of like recreating the sky. Basically, we already hide the trees in the background, and that's all that happened in the sky folder. Let's get back to the main file. So that's the sky we work on. But there's also that I forgot to mention, and it's the creation of the sunlight. I'm just gonna close this layer and this. Okay. So I got the background. If I want to get into an expert mode, so I can shift my file to the left or the right, just gotta press F so I can move it around in my Photoshop without having any trouble. So I'm gonna create a new layer. I'm gonna call it sun, because the sky right now is working with the building. These blues are somehow matching with these blues, but I don't know where the lighting is coming from. I see some highlights in here, but I don't know where the light source is. So I'm just gonna paint it. I'm gonna create once again a gradient, make the light source, whether it's white or whether it's like a subtle yellow. I'm just gonna go for white. So in here, it's not working my gradient because the way that I set up my gradient wasn't radial gradient. So I'm just gonna click in here, get a radial gradient. Oh, sorry. All right. And I'm gonna create the sun basically with my radial gradient. Turn on the base render and then start playing with the opacity of this layer. So now we emphasize where the lighting is coming from. All right, let's get back to the main file. So that's the sky right now. We already created the sky. We got the base render. We got the region patch. Now we're going to add the passes. So the passes we use are reflection, refraction, and ambient. So I got my file in here. I'm going to start using my ambient occlusion, getting more definition on the edges. So I turn on my ambient occlusion. So the light, the image is basically black and white, and all the ambient occlusion generated in the trees is really dark. So that's not going to enhance or help my trees to get more depth. So what I'm going to do is just create a mask over that layer to start selecting the items I want to see with ambient occlusion. So to make this ambient occlusion useful, I'm just going to use a blending mode. I'm just going to make this white image into a dark mode. I'm just going to use a multiply. So if I start switching on and off the layer, that's the problem I've got in the trees. But the definition I've got in here is definitely helping to enhance depth into the building. So basically what I'm going to do is just using the ambient occlusion only in this area, in the main building. And how we integrate all this circulation, how we integrate the building with the right hand side of the image. So before we didn't have like there's a texture in here. So texture in here we didn't have before, but we added in order to integrate the building with the immediate context. These are the elements we use in the 3D Max file for framing the image and adding depth, which are just the foliage of the trees and transportation. So we did that in 3D, but in a Photoshop file, we just create like a vignetting to enhance the contrast and shadows in those areas. All right, that's the explanation. All right, getting back to the main file. I'm being focused in the animation areas. I'm just gonna select the walls that I want to change, the area that I want to bring some light. I'm just gonna play with an exposure adjustment of the main wall of these areas to bring some light and life. But still, we don't see nothing going on in this glazing. So we're just gonna be adding some lights, not only in these areas, but also in the Falcon's landing, and also in the parking side, as well for the cars. traffic lights. So I'm just gonna get back to the lighting folder. So I'm just gonna switch off all this folder. Traffic lights. How we create these traffic lights is basically just if we see the render, the color is pretty much desaturated, and what we need to do is create a base layer, then a glow, how that base layer start bleeding and creating some glow all over the color, and then some highlights to dodge a little bit our base color. So that's the base color. That base color we just painted with a normal brush, which edges are sharper. So in this file is already set up. I'm showing you how we create that part. So I'll do the whole thing anyway. Then after having this base color, we create a glow. So glow, it can happen in a different blending mode. It can happen in a normal blending mode, or it can be also a contrasting blending mode. So vivid light or soft light or hard light, they create and enhance how color is manipulated. So if I create a new layer trying to recreate that glow, just gonna pick the color from the main source. It's gonna make it a little bit brighter. The brush needs to be softer. I'm gonna apply transfer so the edges are softer as well. Play with opacity. I'm gonna start creating some bleeding all over the main lighting source. So that's how we create glow. And after that, we just create a highlight. So there are different ways to create highlights or color dodging one layer. Whether I create a copy of all the information I've got in here, so I create a new layer, go into edit mode, copy merge, which basically is going to copy all the information containing all layers in one layer. And now I'm just going to paste it. So if I shift this, I get a copy of my selection. And there's an option on the tools on the left-hand side. You got the dodge tool, the burn tool, and the sponge tool. So I'm just going to use the dodge. And I can affect the midtones, shadows, or highlights of my base layer. So if you see the subtle difference, I'm burning the color and adding some temperature, some lightness into these lights. That's one way to do the color dodging. The other way to do it is just creating a new layer. You paint that layer in black. You make that layer color dodge, so the layer will be transparent. But at the time of painting, you play against the black. So it means like you use a bright color. In this case, it's going to be white, or I can use bright red. And I'll start painting over. So I'll bring vivid colors to my base color. That's the basics of creating light in an image. So now that we've got traffic lights on, that's going to be later. Now, okay, the light in the main areas could be represented in different ways, but I keep playing with my adjusting layers with a selecting mask. Now that we got this image finished, what happens if the client doesn't like the image? Right? Like,
What's that? Yeah.
so the client is not happy about the sunset shot. He likes the highlights. He likes how the shape of the building looks like, but he doesn't like the image because it's not dramatic enough. So what we did was like the recreation, how that is seen is going to be a rainy shot. And how to make a rainy shot is just understanding in the few steps possible how to recreate a rainy shot. So basically we have to understand where the rain is coming from. We gotta change the background in order to make the rain more believable. We have to recreate some basic water features, water puddles in some areas of the image, and changing completely the whole color correction, the whole color grading of the image, turning into a more desaturated, into more achromatic look and feel. So I'm just going to open this layer. Should I explain the whole process? All right. So we select the background, and we, with some texturing, we've start recreating what the sky could be.
It's an interesting point when you're using sky textures. You know, often you'll find something that works well, but more often than not, you actually have to go in and do some adjusting so that you can really tell where the light's coming from and really contour the clouds. So often we'll go in and we'll actually add some adjustments to the clouds themselves to give them a little bit more shape and definition. In the case here, it just worked.
Yes, in this case, the clouds were not adjusting with the scene. I mean, the scene is red, and these clouds are just blue. So I need to fix that correction. So I just need to paint over some lighting and then adjusting this color. So I create a clipping color over my sky, and that's going to adjust my color to the current final image. After that, I'm just going to start selecting and creating reflections over the ground. So the way to create reflection, create water puddles, just understanding the base color, which is the brush, and then creating the atmospheric effect, which is a glow around that brush. And after creating the glow, just color dodge or burn that base layer. So that's how lights are created.
You guys did a really good job with the people in the foreground and the buildings in the background, as far as merging them in and making it look seamless. How do you typically approach that? It looks like you played with the contrast and the saturation, because I see a lot of images where the people, they don't match. You know, they use billboard people or whatever. Do you have a formula, or is there typically a way you approach that? Because it is very seamless with the rest of the crowd.
You had the foreground people in particular?
Sorry, what did you?
Was the question the foreground people in particular? Or
yeah, those came from a photograph, didn't they? And
yeah.
you guys collaged them in.
Yeah, it's just a matter of really making them match the scene, so bringing them down and then building them back up with adjustment layers and adding the rim lights. It was definitely took a long time. So that was one of the more time-consuming parts of our process on this image. And I think making sure that they were working with the camera. It's a bit of a cheat, this shot. We're actually not in the stands. The camera's not actually in the stands. And once we got into into post, we we realized that the people actually needed to be brought up a little bit higher. But you actually can't really tell. These people are probably floating about 20 feet in the air. But somehow you're willing to sort of suspend disbelief because you're creating an atmosphere, and the people really add to that. We learned a lot about football on this job. I did, so I know about players and jerseys.
Here in the program, you have two subjects. One of these is when to use the hero characters in the images. And the other thing is the great debate between pixels versus inches with the file output for printing versus digital use for that. So I don't know, how do you manage all of the things in your studio?
So hero characters?
Hero characters and the output files.
Well, for an image like this, it sort of explains itself. We want to have those people framing the image, and those would be our heroes.